Thank you for joining us on our YouTube channel as we strive to get a more progressive voice of faith out to a larger audience. Our videos are mostly from the pastor at Community Christian Church in Springfield, Missouri, Dr. Roger Ray. We are always pleased to have feedback from our viewers. You can visit our website at spfccc.org or write to us at reverend.drray@aol.com.
As the career of the probably insane comic Andy Kaufman began to take off in the 1970s, Kaufman made the decision to return to what had been his part-time job from the time he was 17 years old, which was being a busboy in a diner. Appearing on Saturday Night Live, then in Playboy clubs, and finally to a lead role in a regular television show, he became aware that wealth and fame could separate him from the everyday people that had made him a good comic in the first place. It was his connection to, his understanding of everyday life that had made him successful. And so he spent part of every week working as a busboy in a diner where people didn't necessarily recognize him, have any idea who he was, and he did that until his cancer became so serious that he could no longer work. And when I first learned about Kaufman, I was initially impressed, but then almost immediately I felt ashamed because it's such an obvious thing to stay in touch with common people, to stay in touch with your roots, not to let your goals of success rob you of being who you are, literally, to lose your own soul. There's been a poster floating around liberal religious websites lately that has a caption on it that says, "Each week, millions and millions of upper middle class American citizens put on expensive clothes, load themselves into SUVs, and drive past homeless shelters, orphanages, prisons, missions, and halfway houses on their way to very expensive and nice church buildings where somebody tells them how to be more like Jesus." Let the congregation say, "Ouch." I'm sure some of you get tired of hearing about our regular involvement at Bill's Place and Crosslines. In 2004, I chaired an effort to build 200 little cinder block houses in rural Nicaragua in a blitz build. It was the largest single mission effort I've ever been a part of, and we had to raise nearly $500,000, and I had to make a lot of trips to Nicaragua buying land and being involved in some of the neighborhood development. And the next year, when I was trying to organize a new team to go down to help work in those villages in Nicaragua, one of my church members complained, "That's what we did last year. Let's do something different this year." And that made me very angry. but in a way, I understand it, because for most of the world, religion is really just entertainment. It's really just a diversion. In a recent poll conducted by Huffington Post, 70% of the people that go to church indicated that nothing had ever happened in church that changed their lives or changed what they thought. It's really just a form of excitement, something a little bit thrilling, and doing the same thing over and over. I mean, we built 200 houses in Nicaragua. Surely there's no more poverty in Nicaragua, right? There's no reason to go back there, because that lacks an element of Hollywood imagination. And so now in this new church, we wanted to establish right from the beginning that we were going to be not just advocates of social justice, but that we were going to spend part of our time and our resources every week working on it. The first thing we did was to build a playground for a homeless shelter. And once done, we began casting around for what we're going to do on a regular basis. So for years now, I've gone every week to this shelter where people who don't even live in a homeless shelter, people that live in their cars or under bridges, come inside to get warm, and we bring them food and sleeping bags and tents and try to resource their needs, especially for the winter. And for me, that is my Andy Kaufman moment in the week. For the last few months, we've been going twice a week, but we're we're trying to inspire another church to get interested in taking over one of those days. And there's only 400 churches in town, so it's difficult to cover the 5 days there. We have recently recruited a bank that will come along every month or so and do one. And, you know, ultimately in the United States, I mean, banks are more holy than churches anyway, and we've got just about as many of those as we have churches. So we might do a little bit better there. But that is my touchstone with reality. I want to make sure that at least once a week, I'm down there hanging out with guys who, some of them are just poor. I mean, some of the guys that are there to eat or get resources are just poor. They've run out of a job. Their families aren't able to help them. But also there's a lot of people there that are either recovering from addictions or they haven't really started recovering from the addiction just yet. And there's people there with mental illnesses, tuberculosis, HIV, hepatitis. I have people asking me all the time if they could come and bring their kids. I'm like, you know, I wouldn't take my kid, you know, because there are choices that I can make for myself that I don't want to make for my daughter. But some of the people are sick. Almost all of them are on parole or have warrants out for their arrest somewhere. So we want to walk every week into a place that helps us to remember why we exist and what we're all about. For me to be a real pastor, I feel that I need to stay in close contact with the people in our society who are in the greatest need, who are the most broken, who are the most vulnerable, and quite frankly, the people who have been most severely abandoned by religion. Back when Bruce Willis still had hair, he made a movie with a child actor, Haley Osment, that was so frightening it made my hair start falling out. I don't normally expose myself to horror movies, but my daughter sold me on the idea that it was a mystery, which it's not. The Sixth Sense has little Cole sharing with a psychiatrist in this horrifying secret. He pulls the covers up under his chin and he whispers, "I see dead people. They're walking around everywhere. They only see what they want to see. They don't even know that they're dead." Now, someone took that iconic picture of the frightened child pulling the covers up under his chin and changed the caption. "I see churches. They're big buildings everywhere, but they only see what they want to see, and they don't even know that they're dead." Now, that seems a little harsh, but I know where the sentiment comes from. But rather than saying that they're dead, I think it might be more fair to say that they're sleeping, because that's how the faith community is portrayed in this reading that we had this morning from 1 Samuel. The literal story is that the boy Samuel is sleeping in the temple where the Ark of the Covenant was. That's kind of an odd proposition in the first place. But the Lord keeps calling him, and he keeps thinking that it's the old priest Eli calling for him. It takes several times for Samuel to finally get Eli to say, "Why don't you just sit still and see if it's God?" Now, that part of the story, that back and forth, and I appreciate the fact, Colonel Hertenstein, that you kept changing the way you said it because it is very repetitious, but obviously got coached a little bit in public reading, didn't he? That repetition would be fairly meaningless except for what it symbolizes. The writer in the narrative sets up the account. Do you remember how it began? The word of the Lord was rare in those days, and visions were not widespread. How's that for an introduction? How would that work as an introduction to what modern religion is like in America in the 21st century? The word of the Lord's pretty rare. Not many folks with a vision. Sleeping is usually used as a metaphor in Scripture, both in the Old Testament and the Gospels, of just not being aware, of just not getting it. You remember that scene in the Garden of Gethsemane where the disciples keep going to sleep while Jesus is having so much anxiety, he's sweating blood. And in the both Pauline and the Deutero-Pauline epistles, the writers enjoin the church to wake up and realize what's going on. My continued hammering of issues of biblical criticism and of the historical Jesus goes to this issue of how the church managed to take an incredibly powerful, life-changing, socially changing message of Jesus and put it into prison, put it into a prison of doctrines and dogmas, rituals and creeds that go so far that they actually completely silence the voice of Jesus. Jesus is gone from most of the creeds and those doctrines. Just look at the most commonly repeated creed itself. I believe in God the Father, creator of heaven and earth. I believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate. That's a big sentence. Born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate. Not a thing about what he said. Not a thing about what he stood for. Not a thing about what he tried to get us to understand, to appreciate, to imitate. Just that he was born of a virgin. You're on a slippery slope already. Executed by a Roman governor. Not hard to get done in those days. And not a word about his teachings. From the creed, you have no idea what Jesus stood for. For indeed, the word of the Lord was rare in those days, darn near non-existent. Visions weren't even supposed to have them. You have the vision the institutional church tells you to have. Past that, please hold your tongue. The church has used belief in order to cover their ears and fail to hear how Jesus told us very clearly, exemplified to us, to heal the sick, to serve the downtrodden, to bring liberation to the oppressed, to forgive, even to love our enemies. Those of you who have suffered through reading that book that I wrote several years ago, if you look up Christian Wisdom for Today on Amazon.com, I think it may be like the 700,000th least read book in America today. But I mention a concept in it called fideism. Fideism is a way of thinking that you believe something in an a priori way. That is, you have a right relationship with God based on what you believe. You have to believe the right things. You can reject reason, you can reject history, you can reject scholarship as long as you believe the right things. And the Catholic Church officially calls fideism a heresy. But you have to admit that most Protestant and Catholics practice it with reckless abandon. That how do you have a right relationship with God? By believing the right things, just saying the right words. As if religion was all about some kind of magical incantation, that the Lord God in heaven is so narcissistic and so mentally wounded that all God really wants is for us inside our heads to think about how great God is. That's not a great God. That's someone ready for treatment. But the church tries to tell you that you have to believe the right things, and your soul, which, by the way, no one has ever seen or knows exists, will go to heaven, which, by the way, no one has ever seen or knows exists, and will keep you from going to hell, which also no one has ever seen or knows exists, which is so much easier than actually doing what Jesus distinctly said that we should do, which is not just drive past those missions and homeless shelters and to pay attention to who's living under a bridge near your house and to forgive the people who have hurt you and even to love them rather than preemptively invading them and bombing them and killing them. So the church focuses on getting everyone to believe the right magical sentences, and in the process of forcing you to believe the right magical sentences over and over, we are terminally boring you to death. And is it any wonder that most churches have simply gone to sleep? I see churches. Harriet Tubman, the amazing black woman who was so successful as an abolitionist in America, is famous for having said, "I freed 1,000 slaves. But I could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves." I think when it comes to religion, so many people are trapped in a mental slavery that they don't even recognize that they're slaves. And they could be liberated from meaningless fideism and become alive to a life-changing and world-changing gospel in which social justice and radical compassion give you a reason to get out of bed in the morning, give you a reason to work towards retirement so you can quit going to the office and start going out to change the world in meaningful ways. But you've got to realize first that you're a slave in order to be set free. In the conclusion of this little pericope from 1 Samuel, when God finally has Samuel's attention after several tries, God says to Samuel, I'm about to do something that's going to make anyone who hears it make their ears tingle, make their ears burn. You're going to want to cover your ears when I start talking. For centuries, the church has depended on being able to tell people, you come here and we'll make sure that you get to go to heaven, but if you stay away from here, there's a better than even chance that you're going to end up in hell. And people in droves are staying away from church because that old saw just isn't working anymore. The mainstream denominations are dying. We know that there are mega churches springing up in a few places in America, but on average across the United States, worship attendance in churches in America is fewer than 40. Gigantic structures stand on street corners throughout the East Coast, in some Midwestern cities, on the West Coast, and all through Europe that are virtually empty because that old story of trying to sell a product that probably doesn't exist is over. Megachurches here in the Midwest are using experiences of music and connection. I visited one some time back that had 8 drum sets up front. Some of you complain when we have a drummer in to support one of the songs that we do, but they build buildings now with no windows, put you inside, darken it, and turn the music up so loud that you can feel the buttons on your shirt vibrating against your chest. They are giving you an experience, an existential experience that passes for something meaningful. But when you try to dissect the content, oftentimes there's not much there. Now, there is a Starbucks in the lobby, and I love Starbucks coffee. But it's going to take more than caffeine for the church to actually wake up. It's going to take more than having gymnasiums, because the message will not continue to seduce a population that can look at it and recognize it as a snake oil sham. They've seen it, and they don't want it. Jesus, on the other hand, as apart from religion, Jesus is the teacher of radical compassion. He's the one that told us that love and forgiveness and mercy and self-sacrifice and service of others and working for peace and fighting against poverty, that is our religious heritage. And the only church that will survive, and the only one that deserves to survive, is the church that will wake up to that message.
You've been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at reverenddray@aol.com for more information.